Greetings. Welcome to the Brain Gauge channel. I'm Mark Tarmerdall, and I just want to talk about something that was touched on in the news recently. Uh, and basically, what we have is the topic, overall topic that the news touched on was about reaction time, aging, and physical activity. And, overall theme is that physical activity does improve brain health. And the article that um, that appeared was written by Sandee LaMotte at CNN Health, and it was about, and the title was "Even Small Amounts of Exercise Boost Women's Brain Speed." And in the article, what they talk about is a recent study, a very recent study showed that women did moderate amounts of exercise and or just a small amount of exercise, and that improved their cognitive performance or their cognitive brain speed. The interesting thing was that it did not improve their memory, and they did not see the same effect in men. That was kind of interesting too, but we're not sure why. But anyway, this is really not that new of a finding. But anyway, we'll touch on that in a minute. And one of the things, let me just go back up and we'll use one of our studies as an example of looking at how to look at reaction time studies. And just about every reaction time study that's in the aging field does the same thing. They take reaction time and any kind of cognitive processing speed, but in this case we did reaction time, simple reaction time, and you can do a lot of different modifications of it. You get the same results, but all these studies were the same. They collect data from people across many different ages, between say age 20 and 65, like we did in our study in 2007. And then they plot the results of the average reaction time that you get for those different ages, all the way from, for each group, plus or minus a few years. And what you find is a slight rise in reaction time. In other words, you get a little bit slower as you get older. And people say, oh, well, that's just, so you're getting slower with age and everything else. Well, if you look closely at these aging studies, one of the things you'll notice that what they do, like we did the same thing. We screen for neurological health. We screen for known neurological insults like concussion or neurological disorders, like degenerative disorders like Parkinson's or developmental disorders like autism. And all those people were screened out. And so that what we thought we had were healthy controls. And, this was not, if there was one, anyway, and this is what you typically get in all these studies. And you see reaction time getting slower. So the question is, can you get this reaction time faster again? And for those of you using the brain gauge, the reaction time does impact the speed score. And so I just put this over there for a little bit of context for the brain gauge users, just so that you know that the speed score does change. Well, what happens when you take physical activity into account? And this is something that we didn't take into account back in our study in 2007. And we did have a questionnaire in that study, but we did not incorporate it into the overall thing. We asked people, what's your overall level of activity? And people will say they are very active. And then when you follow it up and say, what do you mean by very active? So, well, I walk to the bus stop every day. That is really not what we were looking for. But anyway, we didn't follow up on that. But if you look through the literature, you can find papers. You can find papers that go pretty far back. For example, there was a 1975 paper by Sperduso and colleagues that found that when you compare inactive versus active individuals, you see a big difference in reaction time. So, in other words, when you compare inactive 23-year-olds versus active 23-year-olds, you see that their reaction times are 10% slower. And as you get older, that difference gets even bigger. So that inactive 50 to 70-year-olds versus active 50 to 70-year-olds have a 40% difference in reaction time. That's enormous. And that would account for this shift right here with age. So basically, if you think about, okay, what's the difference? Could that difference here be largely accounted for by physical activity? And the article that came out yesterday, was basically that this person, this group of people who became moderately physically active, they improved their reaction time, meaning that this number came down and came back down more towards the reaction times they had as when they were younger. So that's the thing to keep in mind, that physical activity impacts both young and old, but it impacts old even more, because the older you get, the slower your reaction time is, as long as you're inactive. When you're active, it doesn't slow down. So I found that pretty interesting. The other interesting thing about that article was they said, well, there was no changes in memory. Now that's a little bit, the other thing that we found in our paper was that we also found that some measures didn't change. And in this one, we were looking at amplitude discrimination and single site adaptation. And single site adaptation is really a measure of plasticity that we've published over and over many times. But and if you want to learn more about those measures, there's several other videos that talk about it. But just real quickly, these are cortical metrics that look at interactions between places in the brain. But basically, amplitude discrimination is a reflection of lateral inhibition. Plasticity is and the single site adaptation is a measure of plasticity, and it's also impacted obviously by lateral inhibition. But these measures are actually building blocks of memory, and it looks like they really don't change at all with age. So that's kind of cool, because these guys, what they found was that memory didn't change with physical activity. And that's consistent with the measures that we found. Again, accuracy and plasticity on the brain gauge scores, they're not changing with age, not unless something happens, not unless you have some neurological insult. Anyway, that's all I was going to talk about. And just if you have any interesting news, send it my way, and anything that you might want to talk about, and have a great day.